Captain Lee Junho stood at the viewing port of the human starship New Seoul. Watching the massive alien structure grow larger with each passing minute, the Valtharian imperial capital hung in space like a crystal mountain, its towers twisted into impossible spirals that caught and reflected starlight in rainbow patterns. Ships moved around it like glowing insects, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Junho had seen many strange things during his years as a military officer and then as a diplomat. He had walked on worlds where the sky rained diamonds and swam in oceans that glowed with living light. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. After 30 years of trying, humanity was finally being allowed to meet the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Impressive, is it not? Ambassador Park Minji appeared beside him at the window. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed, every button polished to a mirror. Shine. The Valtharians built this palace 5,000 years ago. They say it houses over 10 million people. Junho nodded slowly. Through the transparent walls of the palace, he could see gardens that floated in zero gravity and waterfalls that flowed upward in spirals. It must have taken incredible technology to build something like this. Technology we can barely understand, Park agreed, which is why this meeting is so important. The Valtharians control over half the known galaxy. They have weapons that can destroy entire star systems and ships that travel faster than light itself. If we make them our enemies, humanity will not survive. The weight of responsibility settled on Junho's shoulders like a heavy cloak. He was not just representing himself or even his ship. He was representing all of humanity. Every man, woman, and child on Earth, and the growing colonies beyond. Tell me about the protocols again, Junho said, turning away from the magnificent view. Park's expression became serious. The Valtharians are an ancient race. They have ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, and they see humans as newcomers. Primitive newcomers. They agreed to this meeting only because we kept asking for 30 years, and they finally grew tired of ignoring us. She led him to a small briefing room, where holographic displays showed images of tall, graceful aliens with pale blue skin and large violet eyes. Their faces were beautiful but cold, like living statues carved from ice. They have very strict rules about respect and honor, Park continued. When you meet any member of their royal family, you must keep your eyes down. Never look directly at them. Never speak unless they speak to you first. And most importantly, never ever touch them. What happens if we break these rules? Junho asked. Execution, Park said simply. Immediate execution. No trial, no appeal, no second chances. They consider their royal blood sacred. Any contact with outsiders is seen as pollution. Junho studied the images more carefully. The Valtharians wore flowing robes made of materials that seemed to shift color in the light. Their movements were graceful, almost like dancing. Even in the still pictures, they seemed to radiate an otherworldly elegance. Who is their leader? Empress, Kong Sora, Park replied, changing the display to show a woman who appeared to be in her middle years but somehow ageless. Her violet eyes held the wisdom of centuries, and her expression was both beautiful and terrifying. She has ruled the empire for over 200 years. She is said to be fair, but merciless. Cross her, and she will destroy entire worlds without hesitation. The image changed again, this time showing a younger woman who looked similar to the Empress but with softer features. Where the Empress looked like carved ice, this woman seemed to glow with inner warmth. Her eyes held curiosity instead of cold judgment. Princess Yunari, Park said, and her voice became even more serious. The Empress's only daughter and heir to the throne. She is considered the most beautiful and intelligent woman in the empire. She is also the most dangerous person you could possibly encounter. Why dangerous? Because she represents everything the Valtharians value most. Their genetic purity, their cultural superiority, their divine right to rule. If you so much as look at her directly, it will be seen as an insult to the entire empire. The Empress will not hesitate to execute our entire delegation. Junho memorized the princess's face, though he knew he would have to avoid looking at it in person. Even in the hologram, she was stunning. Her long, dark hair fell like water down her back, and her violet eyes seemed to hold secrets and dreams. "I understand," Junho said. "Keep my head down. Speak only when spoken to, and do not touch anyone. Especially not the princess," Park emphasized. "I know this goes against everything we believe as humans. We treat everyone as equals. We look people in the eye when we speak. We shake hands and show friendship through contact. But you must forget all of that. The Valtharians do not see us as equals. To them, we are barely above animals." The thought made Junho's jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. "How long will this visit last?" 3 days, Park replied. 3 days to convince them that humanity is worth their time. 3 days to secure trade agreements, technological exchanges, and most importantly, a promise that they will not see us as a threat to be eliminated. Junho looked out the window again as the new soul approached the docking bay. The palace was even more magnificent up close, its crystal walls stretching up into the darkness of space like frozen lightning. Small alien ships moved in perfect formation around them, their hulls gleaming with energy shields that could probably destroy the new soul with a single shot. "The welcoming ceremony begins in 2 hours, Park said. "You will be part of the honor guard. Remember everything I have told you. The future of humanity depends on how well we perform." As Junho walked to his quarters to prepare, he thought about his home on Earth. He had grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else, where children played in the streets and neighbors helped neighbors. It was a world built on equality and friendship, where a person's worth was measured by their actions, not their birth. Now he was entering a world where such ideas were not just foreign but dangerous, where looking at the wrong person could mean death, and where humanity itself was on trial. He put on his best diplomatic uniform and checked his appearance in the mirror. The man looking back at him had steady eyes and a calm expression, but inside, Junho felt the weight of his entire species resting on his shoulders. In 2 hours, he would meet the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and somehow, he had to convince them that humanity deserved to exist. The crystal throne room was beyond anything Junho had ever imagined. The ceiling stretched up so high it disappeared into misty clouds, and the walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Floating platforms carried alien musicians whose instruments created sounds like singing stars. The floor beneath his feet was polished, so smooth it reflected everything like still water. Junho walked carefully behind Ambassador Park, keeping his eyes focused on the ground. His diplomatic uniform felt tight around his neck, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. Around them, hundreds of Valtharian nobles moved in elegant patterns, their robes flowing like liquid silk. Their voices were musical, speaking in their ancient language that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Remember," Park whispered without moving her lips, eyes down, "speak only when spoken to." The human delegation was small compared to the massive crowd of aliens. Besides Junho and Park, there were only 4 other humans present. Dr. Kim Tae-yoon, their cultural expert, walked with nervous steps. Commander Bae Soo-yoon, their military attach, kept her hand close to her weapon, though she would never be allowed to use it here. The other 2 were junior diplomats whose names Junho had already forgotten in his nervousness. A deep sound filled the room, like a bell made of pure starlight. All conversation stopped. The Valtharian nobles arranged themselves in perfect lines, creating a pathway down the center of the throne room. Junho felt his heart beating faster as he realized what was happening. The royal family was arriving. First came the guards, tall warriors in armor that seemed to be made of frozen lightning. Their faces were hidden behind masks that reflected the crystal light. They moved without sound, their feet barely touching the ground. Then came the court officials, each one wearing robes that marked their rank and position. They carried staffs topped with glowing gems and moved with the grace of dancers. Finally, a figure appeared that made the entire room seem to hold its breath. Empress Kongsora entered the throne room like winter itself. Her robes were white and silver, flowing around her as if made of snow and starlight. Her pale blue skin seemed to glow with inner light, and though Junho kept his eyes down, He could feel the power radiating from her like heat from a fire. When she moved, the very air seemed to bend around her, but it was the figure walking beside her that made Junho's chest tighten with something he could not name. Princess Yuanari moved like music made visible. Her robes were deep purple, the color of twilight skies, and they flowed around her as if she were underwater. Her long black hair was adorned with small crystals that caught the light and threw it back in tiny rainbows. Even with his eyes focused on the floor, Junho could sense her presence, could feel the way the entire room seemed to lean toward her like flowers following the sun. The royal procession moved slowly down the crystal pathway. Junho could hear their footsteps, soft as whispers. On the polished floor, his training told him to keep his head down, to show proper respect. Remember that his life and the lives of everyone he cared about depended on following protocol. But as the princess passed near the human delegation, something unexpected happened. A small object fell from her robes and landed near Giano's feet with a soft chiming sound. It was a ceremonial fan, made of what looked like woven moonbeams and decorated with tiny jewels that sparkled like captured stars. Junho stared at the fan, his mind racing. Protocol demanded that he not move, not acknowledge what had happened, not touch anything that belonged to royalty. But his human instincts, trained by years of courtesy and helpfulness, urged him to pick it up and return it. The princess had stopped walking. The entire procession had stopped. The throne room was so quiet that Junho could hear his own heartbeat. Echoing off the crystal walls, Ambassador Park's hand touched his arm. A warning so subtle that only another human would notice it. "Do not move," she was telling him. "Do not make this situation worse." But Junho looked at the beautiful fan lying on the crystal floor, and he thought about his mother, who had taught him always to help others when they needed it. He thought about his sister, who would have picked up the fan without hesitation. Thought about what it meant to be human, to choose kindness over fear. Before he could stop himself, Junho bent down and carefully picked up the ceremonial fan. The moment his fingers touched the delicate material, he felt a shock run through his body like electricity. The fan was warm, as if it had been resting in sunlight, and it seemed to pulse with life. Junho straightened up, holding the fan carefully in both hands, and then, without thinking, without remembering the warnings, without considering the consequences, he looked up to return it to its owner. His eyes met Princess Yuanari's violet gaze. Time seemed to stop. The crystal room faded away. The watching crowd disappeared, and there was nothing in the universe except those incredible eyes looking into his. They were not cold like her mother's eyes, not distant like the other nobles. They were warm and curious and filled with something that looked almost like hope. The princess's eyes widened in surprise. Her perfect lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak. For a moment that lasted forever, they simply looked at each other, human and alien. Two beings from different worlds, sharing a connection that neither had expected. Then the princess smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it transformed her entire face. The untouchable royal became, for just an instant, simply a young woman who had dropped something and was grateful to have it returned.
Elbold,
She whispered in heavily. Accented standard, the human language she had clearly been studying in secret. The word was so soft that only Junho heard it. Then she took the fan from his hands, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The procession continued as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed, as the royal family took their places on the crystal thrones at the far end of the room. Junho felt Ambassador Park's eyes boring into him like laser beams. He had broken protocol. I had looked directly at the princess. He had touched something sacred to the Valtharian people. But when he glanced around the throne room, he saw something unexpected. Some of the younger Valtharian nobles were looking at him with expressions that seemed almost like admiration. They whispered to each other behind delicate fans, their violet eyes bright with something that might have been excitement. The older nobles, however, looked scandalized. Their faces were cold with disapproval, and Junho could see them murmuring to each other in their musical language. Words like primitive and disgraceful needed no translation. On her crystal throne, Empress Sora sat like a statue carved from ice, her expression unreadable. But Princess Nari sat beside her mother with her chin raised slightly higher than before, her violet eyes occasionally glancing toward the human delegation with something that looked very much like interest. As the ceremony began with speeches in the flowing Valtharian language, Junho realized that his simple act of courtesy had started something he did not understand. The princess had called him bold, and the way she had said it suggested that boldness was not necessarily a bad thing in her eyes. But as he watched the cold faces of the older nobles and the unreadable expression of the Empress, Junho began to wonder if his human instincts had just doomed not only himself, but all of humanity. The cultural exchange ceremony began 3 hours after the formal presentations. Junho stood with the other humans in a designated area of the crystal throne room, watching as Valtharian performers demonstrated their ancient arts. Dancers moved like flowing water across floating platforms, while musicians played instruments that created colors as well as sounds. The music filled the air with shifting patterns of light that painted the crystal walls in rainbow hues. Ambassador Park stood rigidly beside him, her face a mask of diplomatic calm. But Junho could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her ceremonial tablet. The earlier incident with the princess had not gone unnoticed. Several high-ranking nobles had approached Park during the break, their musical voices carrying undertones of displeasure. "We are walking on thin ice," Park murmured, without moving her lips. "Chancellor Kim Dae-ho has been watching us like a hawk watches mice. One more mistake and this entire mission will end in disaster." Junho glanced toward the crystal thrones where the royal family sat. Empress Sora maintained her statue-like composure, her violet eyes observing everything with the cold calculation of a predator. But Princess Nari seemed different from before. She leaned forward slightly in her throne, her attention focused on the human delegation rather than the performances happening around them. Chancellor Kim Dae-ho stood beside the Empress, his tall frame draped in robes of deep red that marked his high position. His face was sharp and angular, and his eyes held the kind of intelligence that missed nothing. When he looked at the humans, his expression showed the same distaste someone might have for insects that had crawled into a palace. "Feast. The Chancellor has been the Empress's advisor for 50 years, Dr. Kim Taeyeon whispered from behind them. "He was against allowing humans into the Empire from the beginning. He sees us as a contamination that threatens their pure society." The Valtharian performances continued for another hour. Warriors demonstrated combat techniques that involved manipulating gravity itself, making their bodies move in impossible ways. Artists created sculptures from crystallized light that sang when touched by the cosmic winds. Scientists showed how they could bend space to create windows into distant galaxies. With each demonstration, Junho felt humanity's insignificance more keenly. Compared to these ancient beings with their impossible technologies and elegant culture, humans seemed primitive indeed. Earth's greatest achievements would be children's toys to the Valtharians. Finally, the moment came that Junho had been dreading, and now announced the Master of Ceremonies in accented standard. "We invite our honored guests from the human worlds to share their cultural traditions with the imperial court." Park stepped forward, her back straight and her voice steady. "Your Imperial Majesty, we are honored by your invitation. We would like to demonstrate some of our traditional music and dance." The human delegation had practiced for weeks before this moment. They performed a classical piece that had been chosen for its dignity and restraint. Dr. Taeyoon played a violin while Commander Soo-yoon and the two junior diplomats performed a formal dance that emphasized precise movements and controlled grace. The Valtharian audience watched politely but without enthusiasm. Junho could see in their faces the same expression people might wear while watching trained animals perform tricks. Interesting, perhaps, but hardly impressive two beings who could make light itself dance to their will. When the performance ended, the polite applause sounded hollow in the vast crystal chamber. Park bowed deeply, and the human delegation began to step back into their designated area. That was when Princess Nari rose from her throne. The movement was so unexpected that it sent a shock through the entire throne room. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the floating musicians paused in their eternal melodies. The princess had never interrupted a ceremony before, never broken protocol in such a dramatic way. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying clearly. Across the crystal chamber, she spoke in standard, her accent making the words sound like music. "I would like to learn the spinning dance." Junho's heart stopped beating. The spinning dance. She was referring to the waltz. A simple partner dance that humans had demonstrated in their cultural videos sent ahead of the diplomatic mission. Videos that she apparently had been studying without her mother's knowledge. Empress. Sora's eyes widened in what might have been shock or fury. Chancellor Deho stepped forward, his face pale with outrage. "Your Highness," he said in their musical language, "this is most inappropriate. You cannot lower yourself too." "I am the heir to the throne," Princess Nari interrupted, switching back to her own language but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "If I wish to learn about our guests' customs, that is my royal prerogative." She stepped down from the crystal platform, her purple robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. Every eye in the throne room followed her movement as she walked, directly toward the human delegation, directly toward Junho. Park grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Do not do this," she hissed under her breath. "Think about what you are risking." But Princess Nari was already standing before him, her violet eyes meeting his with that same curious warmth he had seen earlier, extended one pale hand toward him, palm up, in the universal gesture of invitation. "Will you teach me?" she asked in standard. Her voice soft but carrying clearly in the silent throne room. Junho looked at her outstretched hand and felt the weight of impossible choices. If he refused, he would insult a royal princess in front of her entire court. The diplomatic mission would fail, and humanity would be marked as too primitive and rude to deserve consideration. But if he accepted, he would be touching royalty, dancing with the most sacred person in the Valtharian Empire, breaking every rule that was supposed to keep them all alive. He thought about the warnings, about the executions, about the future of his entire species hanging in the balance. Then he looked into Princess Nara's eyes and saw something there that decided everything for him. Hope. She was looking at him with hope, as if he represented something she had been searching for all her life. Junho stepped forward and took her hand. The moment their fingers touched, a gasp ran through the assembled crowd like wind through wheat. The princess's hand was warm and surprisingly strong, her fingers long and graceful. She smiled at him, a real smile that lit up her entire face. "Show me," she said. Junho placed his other hand carefully on her waist, maintaining the proper distance. For a formal waltz, he had learned to dance as a child, taught by his grandmother, who believed that a gentleman should know how to move with grace. Now in this crystal palace surrounded by alien nobles who might kill him at any moment, those old lessons became the most important knowledge he had ever possessed. The throne room had no music, but Junho began to count the rhythm in his head. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. He took a step back, guiding the princess forward, then stepped to the side as she followed his lead. Princess Nari was a quick learner. Within moments, she had grasped the basic pattern of the waltz. Her movements were naturally graceful, and she followed his guidance with the fluid elegance of her people. But there was something more in her dancing, something that the formal Valtharian performances had lacked. Joy. For the first time in her life, Princess Nari was dancing as an equal partner, rather than performing a ritualized display of status. When Junho spun her gently under his raised arm, she laughed with pure delight, the sound echoing off the crystal walls like music. They moved together across the polished floor, their steps creating soft echoes in the vast chamber. Junho forgot about the watching crowd, forgot about the danger, forgot about everything except the amazing woman in his arms, who was experiencing freedom for the first time. The princess spun again, her purple robes flaring out around her like flower petals, and when she came back to face him, her eyes were bright with tears of happiness. "This is wonderful," she whispered in standard. "I feel like I am flying." Around them, the Valtharian court watched in stunned silence. Some of the younger nobles leaned forward with fascination, whispering to each other about the strange human custom that made their untouchable princess laugh with such genuine joy. But the older generation stood frozen with horror, their faces twisted in expressions of disgust and outrage. On the crystal throne, Empress Sora watched her daughter dance with an expression that was impossible to read. Her violet eyes followed. Every movement, every smile, every moment of happiness that crossed Princess Neris's face, and beside the throne. Chancellor Deho's face had gone from pale to purple with fury. His hands clenched into fists as he watched the sacred heir to the Empire spinning in the arms of a primitive human like a common peasant girl. But Junho saw none of this. All he could see was Princess Nari, radiant with joy, dancing as if the music of the spheres was playing just for them. The dance lasted only 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes changed everything. When the waltz ended, Princess Nari stepped back from Junho with her face glowing with happiness. She curtsied in the human fashion, a gesture so shocking that several elderly nobles actually gasped aloud. Then she looked directly into his eyes and said, "Thank you for showing me what freedom feels like." The words carried clearly across the silent throne room, and Junho realized that she had spoken them in standard on purpose. She wanted everyone to understand exactly what she was saying. Chancellor Kim Daeho moved like a striking snake. Down from the royal platform, his red robes billowing around him like liquid fire. His face was a mask of cold fury as he approached the center of the dance floor. "Guards," he called in the musical Valtharian language, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Arrest the human. He has committed the ultimate crime against our sacred bloodline." 6 warriors in crystal armor surrounded Junho immediately. Their weapons hummed with energy that made the air itself vibrate. Junho raised his hands slowly, showing that he meant no resistance. But his heart was pounding like thunder in his chest. Ambassador Park rushed forward, her diplomatic training taking over despite her obvious terror. "Your Excellency, please. There has been a misunderstanding." Captain Junho was merely responding to Princess Nari's direct request. To refuse would have been an insult to royal authority. Chancellor Deho turned his cold gaze on Park, and she actually took a step backward. The human deliberately corrupted our princess with his primitive customs. He touched sacred royal flesh with his contaminated hands. The penalty for such sacrilege is death? No. The single word rang across the throne room like a bell. Princess Nari stepped between Junho and the Chancellor, her chin raised high and her violet eyes blazing with an inner fire that matched her mother's imperial presence. "I initiated the contact. I requested the dance. If anyone has broken protocol, it was me, not him." The Chancellor's face twisted with rage. "Your Highness, you have been influenced by these creatures. They've poisoned your mind with their concepts of equality and freedom. This proves how dangerous they are to our pure society. Their concepts." Princess Nari's voice rose, carrying a tone of imperial authority that made even the guards hesitate. "Are you saying that I, the heir to the Valtharian throne, am so weak-minded that I can be corrupted by mere humans?" It was a perfect trap. Chancellor Deho had built his career on promoting Valtharian superiority. To say that humans could influence the princess was to admit that humans possessed power equal to or greater than the Valtharians. But to deny it meant accepting that the princess had acted entirely on her own. Empress Sora finally spoke, her voice carrying the absolute authority of 500 conquered worlds. Silence. The throne room became so quiet that Junho could hear his own breathing echoing off the crystal walls. The Empress rose from her throne with the slow, deliberate movements of a predator. When she stood, she seemed to tower over everyone else in the room, though she was not particularly tall. "This situation requires judgment," she said, her words falling like drops of frozen mercury. "Chancellor Deho, you accuse this human of corrupting my daughter. But my daughter claims she acted of her own free will. How do we determine the truth?" Chancellor Deho's eyes gleamed with savage satisfaction. "Your Majesty, there is an ancient law that covers exactly this situation. When the honor of the royal bloodline is questioned, truth may be determined through trial by combat." His blood turned to ice water. He had heard of such trials in his diplomatic briefings. They were relics from the early days of the Valtharian Empire, rarely used but never abolished. If the humans are truly as primitive as we have always believed, the Chancellor continued, then their champion will fall easily to a Valtharian warrior. But if they possess qualities worthy of respect, perhaps their representative will prove himself in honorable combat. The Empress considered this proposal with the cold calculation of a chess master and the stakes. If the human wins, Chancellor, Deho said, his voice dripping with confidence, then humanity will be granted full diplomatic status within our empire. Trade agreements, technology exchanges, mutual defense pacts, everything they have requested. And if he loses, then the human delegation will be executed as corrupters of royal blood, and humanity itself will be declared permanently unwelcome. In Valtharian space, any human ship that enters our territory will be destroyed on sight. The weight of those words settled on the throne room like a heavy blanket. Junho realized that this had been the Chancellor's plan all along. He had been waiting for an excuse to eliminate the human threat forever. Ambassador Park stepped forward. Desperately, Your Majesty. This is hardly fair. Captain Junho is a diplomat, not a warrior. Cannot be expected to face one of your trained fighters. On the contrary, Princess Nari said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber. Captain Junho's military records show extensive combat training. He served with distinction in the colonial border wars before becoming a diplomat. Junho stared at her in surprise. How did she know about his military service? The answer came to him immediately. She had been studying human culture and history in far greater detail than anyone realized. She knew exactly what she was doing. Chancellor Deho smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth. Then it is settled. The human will face our champion. In single combat. The trial will take place tomorrow at noon in the Colosseum of Honor. Who will be your champion? Junho asked, finding his voice at last. Lord Choi Hunhua, the Chancellor replied. Former personal bodyguard to the Empress. Winner of over 200 formal duels. And master of 17 different combat disciplines. Junho had heard that name before. Lord Hunhua was a legend even among humans, spoken of in whispers by military commanders who had studied Valtharian tactics. He was said to be capable of moving faster than human eyes could follow, and strong enough to crush steel with his bare hands. I accept, Junho said quietly. Park grabbed his arm. This is suicide. I cannot possibly win against someone like that. But Princess Nari was looking at him with those violet eyes full of hope and determination. You can win, she said in standard, her voice carrying clearly across the silent throne room. Humans always find a way. Empress Sora studied Junho for a long moment, her ancient eyes seeing something that others might miss. Very well. The trial is set. Captain Lee Junho of Earth will face Lord Choi Hunwoo in combat to determine the fate of human Valtharian relations. She paused, her gaze moving from Junho to her daughter and back again. May the worthier species prevail. As the guards escorted the human delegation to their quarters, Junho caught one last glimpse of Princess Nari. She stood beside her mother's throne, her back straight and her chin raised high. But her violet eyes followed him as he was led away, and in them he saw something that gave him strength. She believed in him. Against all logic, against all odds, the heir to the greatest empire in the galaxy believed that a simple human could somehow find a way to win. That night, lone in his crystal cell, Junho tried not to think about the fact that he was probably going to die tomorrow. Instead, he thought about the way Princess Nari had laughed when she spun in his arms. The way her face had glowed with joy when she experienced freedom for the first time. If he was going to die, at least it would be for something worthwhile. He had shown the most powerful princess in the galaxy what it meant to be treated as an equal. He had given her 5 minutes of pure happiness, and sometimes 5 minutes of happiness was worth a lifetime of safety. Tomorrow, he would face the greatest warrior in the Valtharian Empire. The odds were impossible. The stakes were the survival of his entire species, and he had no idea how he could possibly win. But Princess Nari believed in him, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Colosseum of Honor was older than human civilization, built from black crystal that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The ancient arena stretched upward into the darkness like a throat leading to the void. Spectators filled the floating seats that circled the combat floor, their voices creating a low hum that vibrated through the crystal walls. Junho stood in the preparation chamber, checking his equipment one final time. The Valtharians had provided him with their standard combat gear, an energy blade that hummed with contained lightning, plasma shield generator worn on his left arm, and lightweight armor that would protect against most attacks while still allowing freedom of movement. The armor felt strange on his human frame. It was designed for the taller, more slender Valtharian physique. And despite the automatic adjustments, it pinched in some places and hung loose in others. But it would have to do. Ambassador Park paced nervously behind him, her diplomatic composure finally cracking under the pressure. This is madness, Junho. Lord Hunwu has been fighting for over a century. He knows every combat technique in the Empire. You have been a diplomat for the last 10 years. I was a soldier before I was a diplomat, Junho reminded her, activating his energy blade to test its balance. The weapon felt different from human technology, lighter, but somehow more dangerous. I fought in the border wars. I know how to handle myself in combat, against other humans, Park said desperately. Not against genetically enhanced alien warriors who can move faster than your eyes can track. Dr. Taeon looked up from his tablet, where he had been studying Valtharian combat records. Lord Hunwu has won over 200 formal duels. He has never been defeated, never even been seriously injured. His last opponent lasted less than 30 seconds. Out. The statistics were not encouraging, but Junho tried to push them from his mind. Fear would only make him slower, and he needed every advantage he could get. A soft chime indicated that the combat was about to begin. Guards in crystal armor entered the preparation chamber, their faces hidden behind reflective masks. Time, their leader announced in accented standard. As they walked through the tunnels toward the arena floor, Junho could hear the crowd growing louder. The sound echoed off the crystal walls, creating a cacophony that seemed to press against his skull. He had fought in front of audiences before, but never like this. Never with the fate of his entire species hanging in the balance. They emerged into the arena, and the noise hit him like a physical force. Thousands of Valtharian voices rose in a complex harmony that was both beautiful and terrifying. Above, in the royal viewing box, he could see the familiar figures of the imperial family. Empress Sora sat on her portable throne, her expression as cold and unreadable as always. Chancellor Deho stood beside her, his red robes bright against the black crystal, his face wearing an expression of smug satisfaction, and there, leaning slightly forward in her seat, was Princess Nari. Even at this distance, Junho could see her violet eyes focused on him with intense concentration. She believed he could win, and somehow that belief gave him strength. Lord Choi Hyunwoo was already waiting in the center of the arena. He was everything the legends claimed and more, tall even by Valtharian standards, with the lean build of a predator and the graceful movements of a dancer. His pale blue skin seemed to glow with inner light, and his violet eyes held the cold confidence of someone who had never known defeat. His armor was different from the standard equipment, crafted from materials that seemed to bend light around them. His energy blade was longer than Junho's, and it hummed with a deeper, more threatening sound. When he moved, even slightly, the motion was so fluid it barely seemed real. The Master of Ceremonies floated above the arena on an anti-gravity platform, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the Colosseum. Citizens of the Empire, we gathered today to witness trial by combat. Captain Lee Junho of the Human Worlds will face Lord Choi Hunwoo, champion of the Imperial Guard, to determine the worthiness of the human species. The crowd's noise died too. Complete silence. The rules are simple, the Master continued. Combat continues until one fighter yields or is unable to continue. Weapons provided are energy blades, plasma shields, and anti-gravity platforms. Victory determines not just personal honor, but the future relationship between our species. He paused dramatically. Let the trial begin. A deep tone sounded through the arena, and suddenly Junho found himself facing the greatest warrior in the Valtharian Empire. Lord Hunwa moved first, and he moved faster than Junho had thought possible. One moment he was standing 20 meters away, the next he was directly in front of Junho, with his energy blade slicing toward his neck. Only instinct saved Junho's life. He threw himself backward, feeling the superheated plasma pass centimeters from his throat. His own shield came up automatically, deflecting a follow-up strike that would have taken his head off. The crowd gasped at the speed of the exchange. In less than 2 seconds, Junho had nearly been killed twice. Lord Hyunwoo pressed his attack relentlessly. His blade moved in patterns too fast for human eyes to follow, creating a web of deadly light that forced Junho to give ground steadily. Each strike was perfectly placed. Each movement flowed into the next with mechanical precision. Junho tried to counterattack, but his blade met only empty air. Hyunwoo was never where he appeared to be, his movements creating after-images that confused human perception. A strike that should have connected passed harmlessly through space, while the real Hyunwoo attacked from a completely different angle. Within minutes, Junho was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. His armor had protected him from serious injury, but Hyunwoo was systematically wearing him down, testing his defenses, learning his patterns. The Valtharian crowd began to murmur with disappointment. The fight was proceeding exactly as expected. The primitive human was being methodically destroyed by their superior champion. But Junho was learning to dot each exchange taught him something about his opponent's style. Hyunwoo fought with the precision of centuries of formal training, following patterns that had been perfected over thousands of years. His technique was flawless, his movements perfect, and that was his weakness. Humans did not fight with perfect technique. They fought dirty. They improvised. They did things that made no sense according to formal combat theory. When Hyunwoo launched another perfectly executed attack sequence, Hyunwoo did something completely unexpected. Instead of trying to block or dodge, he dropped his energy blade and dove directly at his opponent's legs. The tackle was pure human desperation, the kind of move that would have been laughable in a formal duel. But it caught Lord Hyunwoo completely off guard. His blade passed over Junho's head while human arms wrapped around alien legs, sending them both crashing to the crystal floor. The crowd erupted in shock. No one had ever seen anything like it. Hugh recovered first, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to break free and leap to his feet. But for the first time in the fight, he looked uncertain. His perfect technique had not prepared him for crude wrestling moves. Junho rolled away and grabbed his fallen blade, coming up in a crouch. Blood ran down his face from a cut above his eye, and his armor was cracked in several places. But he was smiling. "You fight like a book," he said in standard, knowing that Hyunwoo would understand. Every move perfectly planned, every technique flawless. But books do not adapt. Lord Hyunwoo's eyes narrowed. He had expected to face another warrior trained in formal combat. Instead, he was fighting something unpredictable, something that did not follow the rules. The Valtharian champion changed his approach, abandoning his perfect techniques for more aggressive attacks. But Junho was ready for him now. When Hyunwoo struck high, Junho went low. When the alien tried to maintain distance, the human closed in for brutal close-range combat. The fight became a chaos of sparks and plasma. Two completely different fighting philosophies clashed. Hyunwoo's blade work was still superior, but Junho's unpredictability kept him off balance. The human used every dirty trick he had learned in the Border Wars: feints, misdirection attacks that targeted psychological pressure points rather than physical ones, and slowly, impossibly, the tide of battle began to turn. The crowd sensed it first. Their disappointed murmurs changed to excited whispers as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The human was not just surviving. He was actually pushing their champion backward. In the royal box, Princess Nari leaned forward even further, her violet eyes bright with excitement. Chancellor Daeho's smug expression had changed to one of growing concern. The end came suddenly. Hyunwoo, frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, made the mistake of trying to overpower his opponent through sheer force. He launched himself into the air using his anti-gravity platform, intending to strike down from above with all his strength. But Junho had been waiting for exactly that move. As the Valtharian champion descended like a falling star, the human did something that no formal combat training could have prepared. Hyun-woo, 4. He threw his plasma shield like a discus. The spinning shield caught Hyun-woo in midair, disrupting his attack and sending him tumbling to the crystal floor. Before the alien could recover, Junho was on him, pressing his energy blade to Hyun-woo's throat. The cheering in the Coliseum of Honor continued for 10 full minutes. Thousands of Valtharian voices rose in harmonious celebration, their musical language creating patterns of sound that painted the dark crystal walls with echoes of joy. Many spectators had risen from their floating seats, their elegant robes flowing as they applauded the human who had achieved the impossible. Gunho stood in the center of the arena, still breathing heavily from the fight, hardly believing what had happened. Lord Hyun-woo remained beside him, the defeated champion's face showing something that looked very much like admiration. In 3 centuries of combat, Hyun-woo said quietly in standard, "No opponent has ever surprised me as you did today. People fight like wild storms, unpredictable and fierce. There is honor in such courage." From the royal viewing box high above, Empress Sora rose from her crystal throne. The moment she stood, the crowd's cheering faded to respectful silence. Her violet eyes, cold as distant stars, studied the scene below for a long moment before she spoke. "The trial has ended," her voice carried across the arena with absolute authority. "Captain Lee Junho of Earth has proven himself in honorable combat. Therefore, the judgment is clear." She paused, and in that silence, the fate of 2 entire species hung in the balance. Humanity has demonstrated qualities worthy of our respect. They shall be granted full diplomatic status within the Valtharian Empire, with all rights and privileges that such status provides. The crowd erupted again, but this time the cheering had a different quality. It was no longer the excitement of witnessing an upset victory. It was the sound of a people celebrating the birth of a new friendship. Chancellor Kim Dae-ho stepped forward, his face pale with defeat. "Your Majesty, I must protest. This human used crude tactics, fighting without proper form or technique. How can such primitive methods be considered honorable?" Princess Neri answered before her mother could speak, her clear voice carrying across the arena like silver bells. "Chancellor, you speak of primitive methods, but what did we witness today? We saw creativity triumph over rigid thinking. We saw determination overcome superior force. We saw someone refuse to surrender even when facing impossible odds. Are these not the very qualities we claim to value in our own people?" She moved to the edge of the royal box, her purple robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. "For too long, we've believed that perfection meant following the same patterns our ancestors established thousands of years ago. But this human showed us something different. He showed us that true strength comes not from perfect technique, but from the willingness to adapt, to think differently, to find new solutions when old ones fail." The princess looked directly at Junho, her violet eyes bright with something that transcended mere political alliance. "He showed us what it means to dance with freedom instead of dancing with chains." Her words sent a ripple of understanding through the crowd. The younger Valtharians especially seemed to grasp the deeper meaning of what had happened. This was about more than just combat techniques or diplomatic treaties. This was about the courage to break free from limiting traditions and embrace new possibilities. Empress Sora listened to her daughter's words with an expression that was impossible to read. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Chancellor Dae-ho," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment, "your concerns are noted but overruled. You have served this empire faithfully for 50 years, but your inability to recognize worth in different forms has made you unsuitable for continued service. You are hereby relieved of your position." The Chancellor's face went through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly white. He bowed stiffly and withdrew from the royal box without another word, his red robes trailing behind him like spilled blood. "Furthermore," the Empress continued, "Princess Nari will assume responsibility for managing our new relationship with humanity. She has shown wisdom in recognizing their potential, and she will serve as our primary liaison for all future diplomatic endeavors." Princess Nari's face lit up with a joy so pure that it seemed to illuminate the entire arena. She had been given not just a political appointment, but the freedom to pursue her fascination with human culture openly and officially. The formal ceremonies that followed took several hours. Treaties were signed, trade agreements established, and cultural exchange programs initiated. But through it all, Gunho found his attention drawn repeatedly to Princess Nari, who seemed to glow with happiness as she discussed the future possibilities for cooperation between their species. When the official proceedings finally ended, approached him privately in one of the crystal corridors leading away from the arena. "Thank you," she said simply, speaking in standard with only the faintest trace of accent. "You gave me something I never thought I could have." "What is that?" Junho asked. "A choice," she replied. "For the first time in my life, I have been allowed to choose my own path, to pursue my own interests, to make decisions based on what I believe is right rather than what tradition demands." She moved closer, her violet eyes looking into his, with an intensity that made his heart race. "When we danced, you treated me not as an untouchable princess, but as simply Nari. No one had ever done that before. No one had ever shown me what it felt like to be seen as a person rather than a symbol." "You are a person," Junho said. "A remarkable person who happens to be a princess, but a person first." She smiled, and the expression transformed her from an ethereal alien royalty into something warmer and more human. "I have convinced my mother to allow me to establish a cultural exchange program. I will be spending the next year traveling to human worlds, learning about your customs, your arts, your ways of thinking. And after that, I will return here and begin teaching my people what I have learned, starting with dance." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "I think the waltz should become mandatory education for all young nobles." They walked together through the crystal corridors, talking about the future with the excitement of two people who had just discovered that impossible dreams could sometimes come true. Around them, Valtharian citizens watched with curiosity rather than shock, their attitudes transformed by what they had witnessed in the arena. 6 months later, Junho returned to the Valtharian capital as part of the first official human trade delegation. The crystal throne room had been modified to include a large open area specifically designed for dancing, and twice a week, Princess Nari held informal gatherings where young Valtharians could learn human dances from visiting instructors. The sight that greeted him was beyond anything he could have imagined. Dozens of young Valtharian nobles were moving across the crystal floor in perfect waltzes, their partners laughing with genuine joy as they spun and turned to music that blended human melodies with Valtharian harmonies. But the most amazing sight was Princess Nari herself. Now wearing robes that combined traditional Valtharian elegance with human practicality, teaching a group of children how to perform a simple folk dance. Her face was radiant with happiness as she demonstrated the steps, her movements flowing with the same grace she had always possessed, but now infused with a freedom that was entirely new. When she saw Huno enter the throne room, she excused herself from her students and glided over to greet him. Without hesitation, she extended her hand in the universal invitation to dance. "Shall we show them how it is really done?" she asked, with a smile that could have lit up the entire palace. Junho took her hand, and together they moved on to the dance floor. As they began to waltz, the entire room fell silent to watch. But this time, the silence held no shock or scandal. It held only appreciation for something beautiful. As they spun together across the crystal floor, Junho reflected on how much had changed. The dance that had once threatened to destroy both their species had instead become the foundation for a friendship that was transforming to civilizations. Princess Nari had been right. Sometimes the most important revolutions began with a simple dance. And as the music swelled around them and the watching crowd began to clap in rhythm, Junho realized that he had helped give the galaxy something precious, proof that different species could learn from each other, that rigid traditions could evolve without losing their beauty, and that sometimes the best way to honor the past was to dance boldly into the future. The waltz ended with Princess Nari spinning one final time. Under his raised arm, her laughter echoing off the crystal walls like the sound of pure joy given voice. And in that moment, both human and Valtharian alike understood that they were witnessing the birth of something entirely new, a galaxy where different peoples could come together, not as conquerors and conquered, but as partners in an eternal dance of mutual discovery and respect. The future had never looked brighter.